Welcome to the Grow Your Business and Grow Your Wealth podcast with Gary Heldt. Gary is an expert in helping business owners put together a plan that will provide a better future for their businesses, themselves, and their families. On the podcast, Gary interviews other professionals who share his vision, and together they share secrets and strategies any business owner can use to build a better financial foundation for your business and your life.
Welcome back to our podcast. And today my guest is Regine Williams, and she is the founder and managing partner of Francois Williams Legal LLC. Welcome, Regine.
Thank you for having me, Gary. It's great to be with you.
Thank you. What made you decide to get into law?
Oh, that's a story.
We always like stories.
I know. So when I went to undergrad, I did not know I was going to practice law. I should have known, but I did not. I have a degree in international studies from American University, and I thought I was going to go into the foreign affairs, so become a diplomat and travel the world and all of those things. But as most of us, when we're in college, we learn more about ourselves. I realized that I'm really consistent, and I like consistency and patterns and habit. And I was like, how will I be traveling? I just couldn't see myself traveling from country to country every 2 years, although I do still love traveling.
Right.
So I thought about which career path would give me the most flexibility while using some of my skills, and which career path I didn't have to be, like if I went into medicine, then I potentially would always have to do medicine. At least that's what my 19, 20-year-old brain thought.
Right.
And I was like, well, in law, you can have the flexibility to do more than one thing. So I decided to, after undergrad, took a year off and then applied for law school.
Now, so is there a specific part of the law that you enjoy more?
Well, right now I enjoy trust and estate planning and probate administration. That's what the focus of our firm is. But I've been doing this for 18 years now, and I've done all sorts of different types of law, which is another reason I love the practice of law, because you don't have to be pigeonholed. So I started out doing domestic violence litigation. I did insurance defense litigation in my 18 years. And then eventually in 2016, I really had a moment where I was like, oh, I really want to go into trust and estate planning. And I absolutely love it. So that's where I am now.
What is it about the trust and estates that really gets you excited?
I think that it's one of the areas that is really underserved in communities across, right? It's one of the areas that's really misunderstood. There are lots of myths that are related to trust and estate planning area. And I'll just give you a personal story. In 2016, I ended up having back surgery. And it was emergency back surgery. And I got to the hospital and they asked me for my advance directive, which is the document that provides for the management of your healthcare. And I had my documents. And I remembered when we were leaving my place, my dad and I were like having a tug of war about whether or not I was going to bring this document. In his thought process, if I bring this document, I'm certainly going to die, which is one of the myths, right? And I was like, but no, I have these documents. I need to bring them so that if something were to happen, we know what clear instructions I have for myself, right? And so I did. And the lady was kind of like, when she asked me and I answered, she was like, oh, really? Like, I was like, well, is it a trick question? You asked me a question, I had an answer. And after the surgery and during my recovery, I was just thinking about, like, there are really people out here that are, unfortunately, car accidents happen every day. People get sick every day. People get ill. You could be out of the country and, the bank, suspends your account and you have no one available to make those decisions for you. And you don't have a plan in action. So I decided to just move away from the litigation aspect of my firm. I studied for it, studied to make sure that I was competent for a few years. And then in about 2020, 2019, I turned my entire focus to trust and estate work. And so I love it.
Yeah. I mean, talking about dispelling myths and things like that, there's many times I've run into people that will come in to ask us to help with their parents' final tax return and possibly preparing, their estate or trust return. And they're kind of like, oh, here's my power of attorney. And
Mhm.
they're shocked when I tell them, well, that power of attorney doesn't work for me. And well, why not? My, attorneys did that. Can you talk about why that power of attorney really isn't any good anymore?
Sure. So there are two types of powers that people generally use, right? And so it's a document that provides for an agent, somebody who's a trusted person that can assist you, whether you are, alive and unable to do the task or alive and incapacitated. But generally a durable power of attorney or power of attorney can be limited or durable or different types of powers of attorney, and a healthcare document. In different states, it's called different things. I'm licensed in Florida. Here it's called a healthcare designation. In Maryland, it's called an advanced medical directive. In other places, it's called power of attorney for healthcare. But all of those documents provides for an agent to assist you, whether it's healthcare or in the management of your assets, banking, retirement plans, Medicaid planning, all sorts of things, depending on the powers that you are comfortable with giving those people. But those powers terminate when you die. So when someone dies, there's no one, and obviously you're no longer alive to
Right.
give and the authority dies with them. So at that point, there either needs to be a trustee or there needs to be a person that's a personal representative that's able to act for the person. And we get that often too. People want to plan for folks, I want to plan for my mom. And it's like, well, do you have the authority? And sometimes you may have a power of attorney, but you may not have that specific right within the document.
Right.
So we have to ensure that the document allows you to act for that person in the way that you want to act. So it has to have the banking power, you're able to talk to the finance office and so forth. So that's the reason.
Yeah. Now, can you explain why someone would use a trust?
Sure. So I will say the trust is a very great vehicle, right? But it's a vehicle that ought to be used wisely, and it's a vehicle that a lot of people there's a lot of myths going on around it. Okay, so what a trust is at its base form, it's a contract. It's a contract between three people: the grantor, which is the person creating the trust, the person that has the stuff; the
Mhm.
trustee, the person managing the trust. Sometimes they're the same people, sometimes they're not, right? And then the beneficiary, whether that is the person that created the trust, you can create a trust and have the assets be to your benefit during your life, or you can have the trust created and have the assets be to the benefit of someone else, okay, during their life, right? Or after your life. And so I would say that at the basic level, I know that trust planning and trust can get pretty complicated, but
Right.
if we're talking about a revocable living trust at the basic, I think the ideal situation for me is when you have assets in different states. Okay. So let's say I have a house in Maryland and I have a house in Florida. If I happen to die as a Maryland resident and I have a will, there needs to be some administration in Maryland, and then there's going to need to be an administration in Florida. Okay. And the rules in each of those jurisdictions are different. I'll
Mhm.
give you an example. Under Florida law, you have to be related to someone to serve or be a Florida resident, right? So if you have a will in Maryland and you have your neighbor, that neighbor may not qualify to serve in Florida, right? So a trust may be the instrument that you use to administer all of those assets upon your death. Okay. So that's a great reason to use a trust. If you have minor children,
Mhm.
and and you have substantial assets to fund the trust, okay? There's nothing worse than an unfunded trust
Yeah.
because then it's just, I mean, I call it, it goes into
Right.
the most important file, which is the shredded,
Right.
it goes down, right?
Right.
But an unfunded trust is meaningless, right? But if you have substantial assets to fund a trust at this time, a trust for minor children is great because a trust gives you the flexibility to distribute assets at certain age. So if you're, for example, if you don't want your kids to get that $3 million at the age of 18, you can say, I'm going to put it in a trust. So you have, the bank account, it's retitled in the name of the trust, the family trust, whatever the name of the trust is. And then those assets are distributed to the children at age 18, then 21, then 25, then whatever the ages that you choose to, right? And the person, the trustee who's managing it, can have discretion to give the children what they need throughout their lives. God forbid something were to happen to you and they're either minors or under the age that you direct. Versus in a will, generally 6 to 9 months later, it has to be distributed, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then a trust is great for complex tax planning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if you are in a couple situation, if you're close to the state exemption or close to the federal exemption, we can do this portability, disclaiming, which is more complex, and I'm not going to get into that today. But a trust is a really great instrument in terms of it allows us to, I say, use the tax code to the benefit of our clients.
Right, right. Now, you said a revocable trust, but there's also irrevocable trust.
Correct.
Can you kind of explain the difference between the two?
Sure. So a revocable living trust is a trust created during the life of the grantor that is amendable, revocable by the person that created it. So if you created a trust today and you no longer want a trust, you had properties in 6 states and you decided to downsize and you only have property in 1 state and you no longer think it benefits you, you can decide you want to terminate the trust. So you can revoke your trust. You can amend the trust. An amendment can be you're changing the terms or the disposition of the trust, or you're adding more assets to the trust. When we're talking about an irrevocable trust, it really is what it says. It's supposed to be not revocable, right? So generally that's done for more complex or tax planning, okay? So when you're giving up your right to manage an asset, you are putting it in an irrevocable trust. Generally, the grantor and the trustee are not the same people, because if you continue to manage your own assets, then it defeats the purpose.
Right.
But part of the reason that we're doing an irrevocable trust, generally speaking, at the baseline, is to segregate those assets out of the person's name so that if, for example, if Maryland does have a $5 million exemption right now, so the person has $8 million, right? We can keep some of the 5 million in a revocable living trust, and the 3 million that could be taxed by the state of Maryland, perhaps we put it in an irrevocable trust. So the person and the trust are taxed differently, but the person is not going to be taxed for the full million. So it's a separate entity, right? You could do it as part of a life insurance. So you can buy life insurance and put it in the trust to offset the taxes. So it's a really great tool to do more complex tax planning and to try to segregate assets for whatever reason that you need to do it. I would caution, one of the myths is, let's take it out of our name so we don't pay taxes on it.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. That's never true, okay?
Oh, I run into that all the time.
You've run into that, I'm sure.
Yes.
The tax authorities are smart, okay, just like you and I. So, whether the trust is paying the taxes or you are paying the taxes, is just a way to manage the tax implication differently, to buffer it differently, so that it doesn't get so one person is not paying it. But it's not a way to just avoid taxes. It's not a way to we can't do it as a fraudulent transfer. You're unfortunately getting a divorce and you're trying to hide assets from the other spouse, or bankruptcy. If you do it well in advance of time and you happen to be in the circumstances, there are certain case laws that speak about that. But generally, when people come and they're like, oh, I'm going to divorce so-and-so in 6 months, I'd like to move all my assets into the trust, it's not something that we can do at that time.
Right. Now, talking through these, it's like, so the irrevocable, once it's set up, then if I'm setting one up for myself and it's set up, someone else is the trustee of it, am I able to ask them to make any changes and if I can, what kind of changes am I able to make with an irrevocable trust?
So with an irrevocable trust, there's certain changes that can be made, but if you're still controlling how the trustee is managing the trust, very problematic, right? So we now have decanting statutes in most jurisdictions, which allows you to pretty much terminate one trust and dump the assets to another. Also, because the trust is a contract, like we've seen where, you have a $2 million house in a trust and you decide you want to sell this house, right? For whatever reason, or this house
Right.
needs to be sold. Perhaps then you have to kind of like swap. So you're swapping the real property for $2 million in cash. So long as the trust has the same value, right? Then it doesn't create an issue. But it will really depend on what the provisions of the document say. And then those are the questions that we're asking clients at the beginning, like, what do you foresee? And then we bring in, what if you want this house? Why are you putting this house in a trust? Why are you not putting cash in this trust? Like, so that we can, because people generally will sell houses. Like now, if it's a family house, it's been owned, in the family for 100 centuries, and we want to pass it on to generations and so forth. And you've created provisions for the maintenance, upkeep, and taxes of that house. Maybe that makes sense. But generally speaking, we're putting liquid assets in it so that if something were to happen and we need to swap assets, it's an easier proposition than now you have a trust that's technically irrevocable and you shouldn't be able to terminate it. Also, it can create a gift issue and the tax issue, which I'm sure you're well versed in. So
Right. Now, from a business standpoint, if someone wants to put their business in a trust, what kind of trust would they typically use and why?
it depends on what type of business, right? And I'll say because of the Corporate Transparency Act,
Mhm.
um, I've been more reluctant, and I'll tell you what I'm sure but I'll share with your audience. But the federal government now has that every business, pretty much every business in the U.S. has to register their business, and then you have to say to the government who the beneficial owners are, right?
Right.
Generally, people are creating trust for the purpose. Part of the purpose is privacy, right? The contents of your trust and who's going to inherit it are generally private until such time that they may not be if they become public, right? But if you are now assigning trust membership, so let's say it's a sole member LLC. If you're assigning the sole member LLC to the trust, you may have to disclose, obviously you have to disclose who the beneficial owners of the sole member LLC if it qualifies under the statute. But then if the trust is assigned to the trust, I'm sorry, if the LLC is assigned to the trust, you may have to disclose also who the owners or the beneficial owners of the trust are.
Right.
There are some non-probate transfer acts throughout the jurisdictions that I practice that are becoming a little bit more helpful. So we're doing that instead of transferring an LLC into a trust. But there are various trust instruments that exist, okay, in relations to business, whether you can assign the membership interest or you can run your business as a trust, whether that's an S Corp or a C Corp and so forth. My concern always is a taxation issue on those, right? Because are you then creating an issue where you are doubly taxed because if the trust is irrevocable, it gets taxed at the highest rate. I think the amount is $15,600 right now, versus if it's an irrevocable trust, is generally a pass through, and so you get the better tax benefit as an individual. So I don't love merging the trust planning with the business planning. Especially now, I used to love it a little bit more. But it's a business. I want the owners or the members or whoever's managing the business to have as much flexibility as they choose, right? Because,
Right.
maybe you have this business today, it's an LLC, maybe in certain, depending on where you are, you can convert it to a C Corp, you can make it, you can elect a C Corp, an S Corp, and so forth. So I want you to have as much flexibility as you would like under your business. So that's the interaction of both of them. But from a personal perspective, and this is just my opinion, I do not love it now because of the CTA and some of the other tax implications of it.
Yeah, I think, and then, with the election coming up, a lot of, these things, could very well be changing because a lot of, the tax laws that we're currently under expire at the end of 2025. And there's a
Right.
lot of talk, especially on the estate side, on where the limits are going to be, and they change. Because I know in Maryland, for a long time, our cap was $1 million. And,
I-
in today's world, I mean, you own two houses, you're over $1 million already.
You own one
Yeah.
house.
Well, it's
Yeah,
true,
you own
true.
one house,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember I started practicing when our cap was
Oh,
665,000.
yeah.
So that's a long way,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember, it's like when the Fed rate went up, Maryland was saying, no, we're not subscribing to that. We're staying here. And there was that we were definitely at that point doing a lot of Maryland estate
Mhm.
returns
Yes,
for
yes,
people. So I think it's something that listeners, if you're hearing this, is that, you know, you have to make sure that you're planning just not for the federal limit, but also for
the
your
state
state
limit.
limit,
Yeah, yes,
which is important. Um, as a business owner, if I'm trying to, um, protect my assets and things like that, um, besides having insurance and things like that, how can I do that? How can I protect, my business assets? Is there, because I know you were saying it's like, you don't love necessarily having the business in the trust anymore or anything like that. Is there another vehicle that you see that we can use to help us?
absolutely. And this is, very, I don't want to say elementary, but a lot of businesses don't have their documents in order.
Hmm.
Right? And so, filing the piece of paper with the Department of State or SDAT is insufficient. It's insufficient. Like
Right.
when clients come in and they have businesses, and we serve a considerable amount of clients that have businesses. If, one of the questions we always ask, do you have a financial advisor? Do you have a CPA? Do you have an accountant? Is there someone else on your team? Right? Because I believe that this practice that I do is a team. We really ought to be more of a team approach. Like I need to talk to all of the people that are helping you, not, the tax filer to the accountant, to the tax analyst, to the financial advisor. And I will say to you, I am often surprised, and I shouldn't be because I've been doing this long enough, that when I'm calling the accountant and the accountant is the one that set up the business,
Hmm.
and hey, this person has a business, and what's the approximate value? One, do they have business articles of organizations? Do they have shareholder agreements? Do they have anything, partnership agreements? And the answer is no.
Yep.
So what happens? I'm like, well, what's the plan? What was the plan that was discussed at the meeting? Because at least I need to then draft these documents for the client. Okay. So I think at the baseline, businesses need to have a structure, right? Whether it's a sole member LLC, there needs to be a structure. For example, I may be a sole member LLC, but what happens if, God forbid, I run out in the street and I get hit by the car? Who is able to go to the bank to pay employees? So incapacity planning, and your durable power of attorney that you have for your personal may not take care of the business if
Right.
the terms are not spelled out in the document, right? So making sure that that's done. Okay. So I think at the baseline, making sure that you have the appropriate document, that's understood. What happens if you're incapacitated? What happens if you die? Um, this whole issue of, I mean, we're all gonna die. I mean, unfortunately,
That's
you're here.
it's
I'm
inevitable.
sorry. That is the bad news that I bring to
Right.
people all the time, and I hate it because I'm a great news bearer, okay? But we're all gonna die. So if you've worked so hard for said business, what's the plan that you have? Because the person that is your personal representative may or may not have the authority to handle the business. Yes, in most jurisdiction, at least the ones that I practice, there's some sort of corporate statute that says that, but sometimes there are roadblocks. The bank will not accept it. The life insurance company will not accept it because it's a business asset. And those things are supposed to be separate, right? And you went through all of this trouble because you wanted to ensure that your personal and your business are separate, but then what happens after you're no longer
Right.
here? I've seen people work super hard in life and then they die and then the business goes into bankruptcy, which is something that I know from talking to the family would have never happened. Like $1 million business, very
Yeah.
successful, 30, 40 years businesses. But when the person passes away, there's no plan. And then there's nobody to, pick it up and run it, whether it's for a short time or until letters are retained. Everybody quits. So now we've laid off all these people. There's nobody that has institutional knowledge and so forth. And then the business goes into bankruptcy. Unfortunate.
Right.
Okay. And then I would say the other thing, I mean, you talked about life insurance, making sure that you have enough. If it's a buy-sell agreement, if you have a partnership, making sure that you have those terms written out, making sure that, life insurance, if you are the primary breadwinner or you're providing some income to your family, that God forbid something were to happen to you, that there's enough income to replace it from the business perspective, not just
Right.
from the personal perspective. And then I would say have a business evaluation, have a business valuation. A lot of us don't know what our businesses are worth and have an exit plan.
Right.
Whatever that plan is, right? I mean, at some point, the plan may be that you just pass away and that you are naturally exiting. But,
Right.
is this a business that's worth selling? Are you growing this business to sell it? Are you growing it to pass it on to children or family? Are you going to grow it so that one of the employees, your key person, can take over the business? So have a plan for the succession of your business. What is the legacy that you are intending to leave by this business, and making sure that those steps are in place?
Yeah, I think that's great advice because I think lots of times as small business owners, we're so busy trying to make money, pay the bills, do things like that. We're not looking at that where, and it could be something as simple as, you're on vacation in Europe and you can't get back and payroll needs to be paid and
Mhm.
there's computer issues and things like that and you're not able to do it. Do you have somebody back here that has the authority to do that? And that's not even looking at, yes, if you unexpectedly pass and can somebody continue operating the business enough to be able to get it sold or have someone take over, whatever it is. You need to have those plans in place because it's going to happen. It's
Yeah.
just when,
When? Yeah.
it's unfortunate, but the Lord does not work on our schedule.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's,
So,
that's the certainty, unfortunately, for everyone, right?
right.
And research shows that most of us, we're going to have some level, some moment, about 2/3 of us will have some moment of incapacity, whether that's you're getting knee surgery and they put you
Yep.
under. And then, God forbid something happens, or, you have something like a bigger incident, a car accident, dementia, whatever it is, right? And so we really need to be planning for those moments, because if you don't, and as a business owner, like, sometimes there are even, penalties. Like if you don't pay the employee on time,
Right.
even though you are the business, you're technically no longer here. There are penalties and fines, and if you're not doing what you're supposed to do from the administrative side. And unfortunately, that's what happened in one of our businesses, right? The person passed away. There was nobody to take over. And, after someone passes away, there's a lot of things that have to happen. There's some sort of final rites, funeral,
Yeah.
burial, cremation, whatever,
Yep.
families grieving. And then, either if you have a trust, there's somebody that may be able to take over. If you don't have a trust, we need to go to the court to get letters of administration. And
Yep.
depending on where you are, that's a delay, right? And so what's happening in this delay, if you don't have a stopgap method to handle, the business during the loss?
Right, right. I think that, I mean, again, listeners, if you didn't get anything, that is huge nuggets right there of information about making sure that you have these things in place, because many of us have it done personally, but we don't have it done for the business. So we
Absolutely.
need to make
Yeah.
sure that we take care of that. Regine, we've covered a lot of stuff here, and you've given us a lot of good information. As business owners, again, we don't, lots of times we don't stop and kind of work on things. We're always working in it. So I really appreciate that. What have I not asked you that you wish I had?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think you've asked all of your question. I just think this area, planning is something that all of us really need to take seriously. I
Yeah,
think that, if especially if you take the time to file that form with the Department of State or Department of Assessment, because you had, whatever that dream of to start baking cookies, selling cookies, a law firm, an accountant firm, or whatever, making sure that as part of that, right, that you also take the time to preserve it because,
right,
it could be that there is just a slight moment of incapacity, but that you have the wherewithal to take the time to ensure that if there is a moment that everything doesn't fall apart. Like I will tell you, there was nothing. Of course, I was, probably anxious or scared as I was having this knee surgery, like most people when they're going to go
sure,
under the knife. But I had my documents. One, at that time, I was a business owner. I was 1 year into my business. So I have a, if I go out of town, if I go out of town, I have a relief attorney. So
right,
if you call the office and I'm not available, there's always somebody that is licensed
right,
and, that can say to you, okay, this is the problem. I will try to get in touch with her. Like I have a licensed attorney that's a relief attorney in every single jurisdiction that I practice. If I'm going out of town and I have employees, payroll's already set for
right.
those however many times and for an extra time. Because you never know. Like last week we had that whole airport, the airport was
Yep.
closed
Yeah.
and the internet went down, right? And so making sure that people are getting paid on time for the service that they're offering to you. And then making sure that God forbid something were to happen, that, my family is not in a circumstance where they have to wonder like, oh, we were counting on X income,
Right.
but there's a replacement for it, for the value. I mean, and I'm saying that not the value of my life, but the value of my labor as it
Sure.
relates to that family. So
Right.
that is super important.
Right. Yeah, Regina, people like what they hear, or that they have questions for you and things, how can they reach you?
Well, I'd love to chat. Thank you for the opportunity. Our website is www.fwilliamslegal.com. We are all on all the socials, I believe, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn as Francois Williams Legal. And so, and I'm also licensed in Maryland, the District of Columbia in Florida, and I look forward to meeting everyone.
Great. Really appreciate your time. Appreciate the information you've shared with us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it.
Sure. This week, our guest was Regine Williams, and she is with Francisco Williams Legal LLC. Thank you, guys, and I'll see you next week.
49 faces looked to him in triumph. Over the last 12 months, they had each taken turns and promoted his business for a week at a time, driving over $987,342 in revenue. What if you had a network of 50 centers of influence who promoted your business every week for a year? Grab your copy of the #1 Amazon best-selling book, The Ultimate Guide to Growing Your Business with a Podcast, at 33% off the Amazon price by going to ultimatepodcastbook.com. Again, that website for 33% off the Amazon price is ultimatepodcastbook.com.